Going to all their respective presentations. I think it's a really good idea that we can start now.
We're in competition for that money, but if you add on our segment, it doesn't detract from transportation.
Right.
What the argument will be was, yeah, but it'll be harder to pass. That'll be the argument. Well, we can't.
But you know, SCAG has and other transportation agencies have good representation and a lot of advocacy going on. And through that advocacy, they could also be helping in this area too.
Yeah.
And working together as opposed to, we want this for transportation, you guys go away and worry about your own thing. Working together we can accomplish it.
Let's do it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. My name hasn't changed. I just wondered if we changed lead times.
Imagine each unit has their own. I'd be freaking out.
No, it wouldn't have gone on.
That's where we're going to march in and taking over. Some of you still
You're only 25 minutes late.
Yeah.
Let's start.
All right.
Everybody's here except
Hey, Kurt,
I'm waiting.
did we get it all taken care of?
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's taken care of, whether there's any blowback.
I'll let you know.
It went out.
I'm meeting with them this afternoon.
It went out at 5:40 yesterday. So that was, I think, before our discussion. But it then went out 2 times after. What's that? All right.
Far enough behind for you now?
Yeah. Plenty of time, right? All right. Go ahead and call the meeting to order. Shall we? All right, I'd like to call the Stationary Source Committee meeting to order. All right, do we need to clear the audience? Come on in. Not that we would. All right, on to the first action item. Consider the request by the City of Newport Beach for the board to add Rule 444. Why we call this anything other than the fire pit rule, but the open burning rule for forecast. Okay, so who's going to be presenting on this?
I am.
All right.
Again, this item relates to a request by the City of Newport Beach that the governing board reconsider amendments that were adopted in 2013 to the district's open burning rule. It's Rule 444. And the amendments were directed towards fire pits, wood burning fire pits located on the beaches. Specifically, what the City of Newport Beach is now requesting is that Rule 444 be included on the rule forecast calendar that will come before the board in December. Let me start by giving some background on the beach burning amendments, the fire pit amendments to Rule 444. Staff first began working on the amendments in 2012, 2013, after receiving complaints from residents in the city of Newport Beach. And Those residents primarily lived near the Balboa Pier and Big Corona Beach, which is just south of the entrance to Newport Harbor. This is the Balboa Pier area on the slide, and get this thing to work. Is that Big Corona? Yeah, that's Big Corona. You can see from both these slides the fire rings are identified by the two squares. There are a substantial number of fire pits in both those areas. The fire pits are fairly close to residences, and the fire pits are located close to one another. After receiving the complaints, staff went out and did some air monitoring near the residences, downwind of the fire pits. The prevailing wind is off the ocean towards the beach, and found that, in fact, there were high levels of wood smoke, certainly high enough to arguably constitute a public nuisance. The rule that the amendments were directed towards the jurisdictions that had control over the fire pits. The rules said basically two things: locate fire pits at least 700 feet from the nearest residence, or make sure that the fire pits are spaced out so that they're no more than 100 feet apart. And then there was a third alternative that said locate the fire pits at least 50 feet apart, but have no more than 15 fire pits in any contiguous beach area. Following the board's adoption of these amendments, there was an effort, a legislative effort that would have placed authority for dealing with the fire pits in the hands of the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission, the City of Newport Beach, and the district met on a number of occasions regarding the legislation, regarding the City of Newport Beach's implementation of the amendments. And I should say, too, that the amendments primarily affected the City of Newport Beach, and primarily the fire pits that were located near the Balboa Pier and Big Corona. There were, along the coastline that was affected by the regulation, from Malibu down to SCAQMD, there were just a handful of other fire pits that were affected. Following the negotiations between the City of Newport Beach, the Coastal Commission, and the district, the city adopted an implementation plan. The City Council actually adopted an implementation plan that was directed towards implementing the fire pit amendments. The legislation died. This was all in 2014. And nothing was heard on this until the mayor of Newport Beach earlier this year sent Dr. Burke a letter asking that the board reconsider the fire pit amendments. I advised Dr. Burke that since Rule 444 was not on the rule forecast calendar, the board couldn't take it up. Knowing this was an important issue for the City of Newport Beach and for the board as well, I secured an outside opinion from an outside law firm who basically said, no, the board can't consider items unless they're on the rule forecast calendar. I conveyed that opinion to the mayor of the City of Newport Beach, and so Newport Beach has now come back and requested that Rule 444 go on the rule forecast calendar for 2017. And Dr. Burke asked that I bring this matter to you for your consideration. So I'd be happy to answer any further questions you might have.
Go ahead.
Chair, has Newport Beach implemented any of the measures that were in Rule 444? They've not done anything?
No, they have. they have implemented.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
obviously, it's Sean Nelson. I actually have a representative from Newport Beach who wants to speak on this item, and they're here, which normally there's no one here at the remote locations. So given Director Mitchell's question, I don't know if this gentleman can answer her question, but he might. And I look to your direction if you want to go ahead and take the comment now, and I can at least make him available for questions if people have questions of Newport Beach.
Sure, let's go ahead and hear his comments then.
All right, I'll scoot over, and Mr. Piotr will take the mic.
Hi, my name is Scott Piotr. I'm a Newport Beach City Councilman. I think last time you were starting out your calendar, you came down to Newport Beach at the hotel, and I welcomed you there. If you recall, I did make comments on the fire pits then. Hopefully you went out and bought some s'mores and enjoyed them. What we've done to answer your question, we have implemented an interim plan that combines a combination of charcoal and wood, and that's the current situation of where the fire pits are. We've moved several of them around so that they have greater distance between them. For the wood-burning ones, they are all 100 feet apart, and at least those that are within 700 feet of residences. And then we've kept the rest of them as charcoal. So we've got kind of a mixture of the two. We've since, that was in 2015, in fact that was early in 2015, and what we did as well as we went to Coastal Commission and we got approval on the revised or a permanent plan that keeps all of the wood fireplaces 100 feet apart and then intersperses charcoal. What that does though, and it hasn't been implemented yet, is it spreads the footprint of the fire pits out considerably. So it will impact a considerable number of our residents that currently are not impacted. We also understand there's particulate monitors on a couple of our facilities down there, particularly on Big Corona. So we now have 4 years worth of data, 2 of which were with 100% charcoal, and 2 in this interim plan where we've spaced out the existing wood-burning fire pits. And if you've got any other questions, I'm available.
What are the amendments that they're seeking? What changes to the rule?
I talked to the Newport Beach. Mr. Piotr may be able to provide some additional information, but I did talk to the city manager from Newport Beach last week, and he indicated that the city council wanted to go back to the status of the rule prior to the amendments being adopted. And prior to the amendments, wood-burning fire pits were exempted from Rule 444. Mr. Piotr, I don't know if you've got anything.
In fact, our city manager is here today, but you're correct. We are interested in going back to the way the rule read before 2013, where it exempted beach fire pits. And that's what we request to go on the SCAQMD's agenda for next year.
Joe?
Do we have monitoring data?
I
do. I'm checking to see what,
Has,
up to what date.
you know, the reason we consider this in the first place because there was a potential health impact and a public nuisance. I'd like to know whether or not the rules worked.
From my recollection, yes, we had lower PM emissions once the rule was in effect.
Thank you.
We currently don't have a monitor at Big Corona.
We will also trying to do a pilot project of alternatives, not charcoal, but propane and natural gas, perhaps. What happened with that?
So the portable propane fire pits are being deployed now. They're at Crystal Cove, and they're being rented out to beachgoers. In fact, there was a picture of one of them in the LA Times when there was an article on the beaches in Southern California or up and down California. So those are being used and they're successful. We've had a difficulty in doing the permanent propane fire pits because of access to putting a propane tank, trenching, and putting them in permanent locations. So Currently, we have not deployed the permanent propane fire pits, but the portable ones are in use.
Do we have an opportunity to help the city of Newport Beach deal with their concerns by using alternative fire pits,
The-
propane?
The challenges we've been facing have been getting the cities or the owners of the beaches to allow us to do that, because they bring up concerns about running a line, a natural gas line or a propane line. How do you rent out the tanks and ensure it's safe, and who starts it? So those have been the issues that we haven't been able to come to terms with any of the beaches to allow us to do the demo.
Okay. Thanks for those answers.
Any other board member questions? We'll otherwise open up for public comment at this time.
Well, Mr. Chairman, again, this is Sean Nelson. I appreciate Dr. Liu's statement, but I do think it's important to just frame what his question was, is does the monitor show there's an effect? I am not a scientist, nor do I need to be, to tell you that if there's no wood burning, the PM level is going to be lower than if there is wood burning. That's not a very technical scientific analysis. Of course, if you light something on fire, you're going to have more PM than if you don't light it on fire. The issue down in Newport Beach, look, I would not be in favor of the concept, but if our basin wants to just make a blanket rule that you can't light wood on fire, so be it. That's a legitimate adult discussion, and if we need to have that, let's have it. But the problem that we got into, and I think we're pretending that this came down to a health concern, and I'm a resident of Orange County, I represent Orange County, and when you saw the vote go down on this board, and you haven't had anything remotely this contentious amongst the board, to come in my term and probably anyone's term, including Dr. Burke's. This was extremely wealthy individuals who had tried over and over again to limit public access, particularly in the evenings, to people from your districts, in many cases ethnic minorities, and they don't want them on the beach at night. And they are smart enough to figure out that their initial attempts over the years and decades in some cases didn't work, and someone came up with the brilliant idea, let's just bellyache about the health effects. And because of the sort of preset compass from our board, there was a very sympathetic ear. But what you got was a lot of statements similar to, well, we tested the air in front of them, and I remind you, what you have is a prevailing wind with a few thousand miles of entry ocean. You would expect that's probably the cleanest air anywhere in Southern California. And then someone stood behind the fire pit and said, yes, we have much higher readings behind the fire pit than in front of it. As if that's even possible, that was a surprise to anyone. But all of this boils down to, if you don't want wood to be set on fire in the basin, then fine, let's have that discussion. But to single out these wood-burning fire pits, and if you can tell this has been a sore subject of mine, and I don't really understand how they hoodwinked most of the people from the Inland Empire to support this. But the fact of the matter is, the rule was sort of bootstrapped into being about health effects, and this was all about beach access. That's what it was about in the beginning. That's what it's about now. So I would just encourage this board to deal with it for what it is. If you don't want people light wood on fire, and we're going to look out for people's health, I don't know why citizens in Newport Beach would be in any different situation than anyone else. And I'm not advocating that we go restrict lighting wood on fire in Palos Verdes or in San Bernardino. I'm not advocating that. But if you're going to make the argument that lighting wood on fire causes the air to be less healthy, A, you're correct, and B, I don't think that's where society is ready to go. But, this board has a lot of authority. So as to Newport Beach, give them the opportunity to do the right thing as a city to protect their own citizens. If we want to invade the space, invade it. But don't make it exclusive to a beach community. Why are they any different than a mountain community? Or Fullerton, where I live? Or Wildemar? If you don't want to let people light a fire, don't. But I don't know why wood burning is any different in Newport Beach than anywhere else, and that's basically what we're doing. And the net effect is limited access for people that don't live along the coast, and that's all that's being accomplished here. You know, and you've got apparently a few people that live in homes that, my guess is from around Big Corona, probably valued at $8 million and up, have less people to deal with. So that's what our task is, mission accomplished. That's just not, I just find it bizarre that this is the one item, the thought that I would step into, pick the jurisdiction, Santa Monica, Wildemar, Palos Verdes, and tell you what's best for your local residents. It never happened. But in this one unique instance, at least the majority of the board, and it was a very close vote, was more than happy to put their toe into this, and it stirred up a hornet's nest that has somewhat died down. But if you're getting the impression, the frayed sensitivities are still pretty fresh. We should stay out of this unless we're going to get all in. And my ask to you is truly, if you want to limit light and wood on fire, then do it. But if you don't, and I'd encourage that's the right answer, don't single out Newport Beach. What's the point? We're here to make general overarching rules that affect everybody. We're not here to pick on beach communities, and we certainly aren't here to limit access to people who live in the Inland Empire from going to use the recreational facilities on the coast. That's all we accomplished. It's unfortunate. Tried to point that out in the first place, but the rest of this is just a charade. Now, give me the science that lighting wood on fire makes air unhealthy. Of course. We all know that. But they're asking to be put on the calendar. And I think that there's no reason we would deny them that other than the belief that a majority probably wouldn't go down the same path because we know it was a close vote. And we're just trying to prevent a vote from happening out of fear. And I think we ought to let the board deal with this issue. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do you have any public comments at this time? Don't have any here. Sean, do you have any more public comments there?
No, I just looked to Mr. Piotr, and he didn't have any other ask, and the city manager's off camera, but he is present in the room.
Okay. Any other board
Thank you.
comments?
I'll move we grant the request.
What's your motion?
I move we
Second.
grant City of Newport Beach's request to add it to the rural forecast report.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Go ahead and call the roll.
Dr. Liu,
No.
Mayor McCallan,
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell,
No.
Supervisor Nelson,
Yes?
Councilmember Benoit.
Yes.
It's 3-2.
All right, the vote is 3-2. We'll move on to the first informational item, report on the technology study. Lockie, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. A few weeks ago, we released, can I have the slides, please? We released the alkylation technology study that was conducted by our consultant, Norton Engineering. And I'll just take a few minutes to go over the study and its findings. And if you haven't heard anything about the study from community members, I can guarantee you they'll be contacting you soon. So let's see. So what is the alkylation process? It's a process that is being utilized by refineries to produce the high-octane gasoline. And it's basically it's a chemical reaction between light hydrocarbons through the use of a catalyst. And the octane is the very component of the gasoline that helps your vehicles run smoothly and also helps us to meet with CARB and US EPA regulations, especially with the premium gasoline high octane requirements. And the catalyst that is being used in this process, so it's a very important process of the refining process. So the catalysts that is being used are typically two types of acids. One is the sulfuric acid, and the second one is the hydrofluoric acid. And when you look at the US, roughly the refiners are split 50-50 in terms of utilizing sulfuric acid or hydrofluoric acid. You look at here in South Coast, we have 6 refineries, 6 large refineries. 2 of them are using hydrofluoric acid-based alkylation process, while the rest, the remaining 4, are using sulfuric acid-based alkylation process. And most of the concerns are coming from the residents residing around those 2 facilities that are utilizing the hydrofluoric acid-based alkylation process, and specifically the community around the Torrance refinery. Why are they concerned? Because hydrofluoric acid is an extremely hazardous material. It's in room temperature, the boiling point is at 67 degrees F. So in room temperature, it volatilizes very easily, it aerosolizes very easily. So in the event there is a leak, through the prevailing winds, it can disperse over the community, and hence the community concerns.
Dan, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks. The concerns that I've heard from the community was that when the accident occurred at the then ExxonMobil refinery, it came close to actually having a release of the modified hydrofluoric acid. But I've never heard an official report on that. Was that true?
It was true. There was an accident that were very close to rupturing some of the pipes, and even though that wasn't addressed necessarily by the report,
Right.
and I'm strictly confining myself to what has been included in the report,
Okay.
but yeah, it was a close call. To diverse a little bit. So one important distinction, though, are 2 local refineries that are using hydrofluoric acid. They're using modified hydrochloric acid, which means they're using some additive that suppresses the vapor pressure of the hydrofluoric acid. So in the event there is a leak, it doesn't disperse as far out, or it doesn't volatilize and aerosolize as easily.
Does that change the temperature or just the amount of time it takes? Is it still going to volatilize at anything above 67 degrees? Or?
It's still going to volatilize at 67 degrees, but it suppresses the volatilization rate.
Okay.
So, and there are some mitigation strategies that are being employed that hopefully, will help mitigate the problem. So I'm going to go over those a couple of slides down the road. So that was the primary purpose to hire NEC to look into, and their main task was to look at potential commercially viable alternatives to the HF process in the event we are interested in moving toward in that direction. And an additional task that was asked of was, in the event there are commercial viable alternatives, what would be the cost to convert from hydrofluoric-based alkylation process to that alternative? So they looked at 7 different alternatives. And I'm listing here the first 4. Obviously, the first one is the modified HF. The second one is the sulfuric acid. Third one, solid acid alkylation and ionic liquid alkylation. And I'll summarize their findings with regards to those top 4. They also look at 3 additional alkylation processes, but those were more paper studies. They never evolved beyond the pilot plant, and they concluded that they were not commercially viable. They were not ready for prime time, so I'm not going to spend any time going over those. So let's take the more viable ones one by one. Let's start with the modified HF. So it is a technology that has been used here in the United States and elsewhere in the world since the 1940s. As I mentioned earlier, roughly 50% of the facilities are using, refineries are using an HF-based process, and that translates to roughly 48 facilities in the US. Generally speaking, when you compare the HF-based alkylation process to a sulfuric acid-based alkylation process, the HF-based process utilizes a lot less HF, which, by the way, is being tracked into the facility on a monthly basis. And typically, For the size of our local facilities, they typically accept 3 to 4 track loads per month into the facility. In the event there is a leak, the way the MHF, the modified HF, will aerosolize and disperse will depend on the size of the leak, the pressures, the atmospheric conditions, the direction of the winds, and certainly on the mitigation measures or the set of mitigation measures that are being utilized by the respective facilities. So I think we covered this, that the HF acid is an extremely corrosive acid and requires special metallurgy. Typically, they'll use Monel, which is an amalgam utilized by by both of our facilities locally. And again, just to give you some sense of magnitude, typically Torrance refining companies' alkylation capacity is approximately 25,000 barrels per day. That's strictly for the alkylation process, not for the entire facility. The second facility is Valero, which is slightly less than 25,000 barrels per day. So because of the risks associated with the HF, these companies are required to develop risk management plans that are being submitted to EPA. They're reviewed by EPA. Also, the facilities are required to employ very sophisticated monitoring and mitigation techniques to minimize and hopefully get rid of, mitigate the leak that may be taking place. For instance, they'll use fence line monitoring, fixed site monitoring to detect even the smallest amount of HF in the air. They'll use sensitive dyes or paints that will change color in the event that particular component comes in contact with HF. They'll use the water deluge system, which is they'll basically deploy massive amounts of water to drain whatever aerosolized HF is out there. And they utilize things like a rapid acid transfer or remotely operated block valves to limit the amount of acid that is going to be released. So with respect to the sulfuric acid, our consultants concluded that this is by far the most viable, commercially proven technology out there. And as we know, it's being utilized by the 4 other refineries here in this basin. One difference between sulfuric acid and hydrofluoric acid, the sulfuric acid-based system, it's a lot more expensive. It requires a lot more vessels, reactors, separators, what have you. And unlike the hydrofluoric acid-based system, which does not require as much hydrofluoric acid, this particular system does require a lot more sulfuric acid. And essentially, they were estimating for a 25,000 barrel per day facility, they'll need close to 1,300 track loads of sulfuric acid to go in and out of the facility on a monthly basis as compared to the 3-4 that is required by...
That's 40 to 45 trucks a day.
Yes, it's a gigantic number, and obviously that introduces some transportation-related risk because sulfuric acid...
Understatement.
Understatement. Sulfuric acid is not a benign acid. I mean, we are talking about a very high concentration acid, which is also extremely corrosive if it comes in contact with the skin. But one of the advantages of the sulfuric acid is its boiling point. It's a lot higher than HF. So under normal atmospheric temperatures, it's going to be in liquid form. And it won't aerosolize as quickly as the HF does. And the refiners are required to develop and implement containment strategies just in the event there is a leak. But those mitigation strategies are not as sophisticated as the ones required with the HF system. So there are different types of risks, and it's a balancing act. So let's go to the third alternative. It's the solid acid alkylation. We don't have this, unlike the first two processes that do utilize massive amounts of acid, that some of it is in vapor phase, some of it is in liquid phase. With this particular one, the acid is embedded within a solid phase catalyst. It's a honeycomb catalyst, and the acid is basically on the surface of the honeycomb catalyst. So the risks associated with the previous two processes do not exist with this particular system. What are the drawbacks of the systems? Well, we don't know much about the system yet because there is only one application out in China. And it's roughly at 2,700 barrels per day, which is roughly 1/10 of the capacity that will be needed by our local refineries, by each of the local refineries. And the application is at a petrochemical facility, not necessarily at a refinery. It's extremely promising, though, because it doesn't have the risks associated with the other two processes do, but we know very little about it. And it was installed towards the tail end of 2015, so we don't even have 1 year's long information yet. But anyhow, they did mention in their report, it is very promising, but we know very little about it. So the next one is the ionic liquid alkylation process, which is also an emerging process. We know very little about it. There was a 5-day-long experimentation in China, the report mentions. Again, it has a much lower vapor pressure, this liquid ionic process, compared to the HF and sulfuric acid-based systems. And risk-wise, it appears to be far superior compared to the other two. But again, we know very little about it because there is no practical application, at least as of the day the report was released. The literature did not present any evidence about this process. But on paper, looks extremely promising. So we had asked them to also give us a ballpark estimate about the cost associated with the conversion of the HF-based system to some alternative. So they cost out for us the sulfuric acid alkylation. And what I'm presenting here, it's a simplified diagram of the HF and sulfuric acid system. In real world, you have a lot more tanks. The process is a lot more intricate than the ones that we are displaying here on the slide. So the conclusion was that it will cost approximately $120 million to switch over. And they were also quick to point out that they were not aware of any actual conversion in the United States from HF to sulfuric acid. But they tried to cost out things, and they concluded it's going to cost close to $120 million, with the assumption that certain units of the HF-based system, like the fractionation columns, they'll be able to repurpose them and continue to use them in the sulfuric acid-based system, which is an assumption. If, for instance, Monel, which is one of the amalgam that is being used in the HF-based system, is being used on those fractionation columns, the sulfuric acid is incompatible with that amalgam, and they'll have to rebuild them from scratch. And if that's the case, the $120 million will start escalating to a much higher number. Also, we talked about the transportation-related risk of sulfuric acid. They pointed out you can minimize that risk by installing a sulfuric acid generation and regeneration plant within the refinery, and assuming that there is a space, because that also takes some space.
And Lockheed, the other refineries that are currently using that technology, is that what they're doing? Or?
Some of them, that's what they're doing. Some of them are transporting the sulfuric acid up in Bay Area. There's a refinery that basically, the sulfuric acid plant is almost across the street, and they are piping the sulfuric acid underground, and they don't have that problem. So
120 million doesn't include.
doesn't include that cost. So if you want to add on the sulfuric acid regeneration, it will be another $45 million. And another key variable here that we all have to be concerned about, these are pretty elaborate, processes and require space. And one of our facilities, at least, even though our consultants were not asked to look at the facility-specific constraints, when we looked at the two facilities, one facility is a little more fortunate than the other one in terms of space. The other one is quite constrained, quite compact in terms of space. So immediately, let's see, for the solid acid alkylation, there is not much information out there in terms of cost. They estimated that the hardware cost will be close to $25 million. However, the catalyst that is going to be used is going to be a lot more expensive, and there'll be much higher operating costs associated with this particular process. So our consultants are estimating at the end of the day, the bottom line cost figures will be very similar to the $120 million, which was what they had estimated for the sulfuric acid conversion.
Quick question about,
Yes.
about that. Do we know what the catalyst is that they use?
No. They are speculating that it's rare earth catalyst that are using precious metals.
That retain value?
Yes. And
sometimes go up in price?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
okay.
And
So
they're being produced
it's a capital investment.
It's a capital investment. There are very few locations in the world that will offer those metals. Often troubled corners of the world,
Right.
But nevertheless, they are the type of catalysts that are being used in other.
I mean, it's not like after you spent that money's gone up in smoke.
No, it's not.
It's sitting there in your reactor with.
Right.
If you had to, you could actually sell it.
You'll have to replenish that catalyst and those metals, and very likely, the vendor of the catalyst will take it upon themselves to basically clean up the catalyst and bring it back to the site. So it's going to be.
How long the catalyst lasts?
We don't, because normally, most catalytic system, they seek to get 4 to 5 years out of the catalyst, but we only have less than a year's long experience with the Chinese facility, and frankly, our consultants were not able to get much information out of that experience. Okay. Maybe it's too soon, maybe they didn't want to.
Larry's going to be there in a few weeks, so stop by.
I'm going next week.
Maybe you're going to be right there. You should figure out where it is and see if you're going to be close by.
Oh, we have the location. We can tell you where it is. So a few days right after we released the Norton report, the Honeywell UOP came up with a press release. And essentially, they are announced to the world, they are making available the ionic liquid alkylation technology alternative. And they're looking for prospective companies who would like to experiment with this technology. Apparently, Chevron has experimented for quite some time in their facility in Salt Lake City. It's a much smaller refinery, roughly the third of the size of our Torrance facility here. But apparently they had been experimenting with it for several years, and they were quite happy with the performance of this particular system. Their current system, and they've committed, according to the press release, to convert their HF-based alkylation process to this ionic liquid-based process. They're expected to start construction in 2017, and assuming all the plans line up, they're expecting to move into the operational phase by 2020.
Do we know
which is
doing it for cost savings or because of safety issues?
I don't know for sure, but I'll go out on a limb to say it's mostly safety issues.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because probably the local community there are having similar issues, that our local communities have. The cost is obviously unknown, but it's encouraging the fact that we have now the press release, and perhaps we'll be able to get a lot more information about this process from them.
I have a question on
Sure.
this slide. You indicate at the bottom that the Torrance capacity is 150,000, but
Right.
they're just doing 25,000 now.
Okay,
What they're doing. So tell
let me
what
make
that
sure that I clarify this. So 150,000 barrels per day is the total crude throughput from the facility. But when you look just at their alkylation process, how many barrels of alkylate that they produce, it's only 25,000.
How
Maybe
does
you
that
can
work?
describe
So-
how that works, the alkylations versus the fuel grade.
Okay, so the alkylation process is where they produce the octanes that enter
Okay,
our
and the
gasoline.
fuels.
It's a
Production fuels.
subset, of what
I get
the
it.
entire refinery does. So
Okay.
all I'm trying to say here is the Salt Lake facility is third of the size of our facility here. So it's scalable. Whatever lessons that we are going to be learning from the Salt Lake facility, chances are we'll be able to replicate them here in this facility. So it's a relevant experience. So in summary, our consultants had concluded that the sulfuric acid alkylation is by far the only commercially available alternative. And the cost estimate was around $120 million with the caveats, obviously, that we mentioned in the presentation. But certainly the salt alkylation and the ionic liquid alkylations are two upcoming and extremely promising technologies that could provide superior, results compared to the other two. And I'll stop there. Oh, by the way, we are going to be going to the community next week, next Saturday, on the 29th, if I'm not mistaken. And we are inviting our consultants to be there with us, and it will be an interesting exchange.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
is there a facility in the area that produces sulfuric acid?
Yes, yes, we do. We have a sulfuric acid producer,
Where?
as well as a regenerator.
Where?
It's close to the refineries, but a few miles away, so it's not like next door. So things will have to be tracked over.
But in the Wilmington, Long Beach area, there's,
We're not creating truck trips out of the Coachella Valley over the refinery.
No, it's not. It's closer to the South Bay area.
Right, right.
South, and it's a reclaim facility.
Okay.
That we dealt with during the SOX reclaim amendment. I don't know whether you remember it or not.
Of course I remember.
Yes.
That many truck trips is very concerning.
And it should be to everyone, because they'll be going through intersections, there are schools, even though I have to tell you.
40 trucks a day, that's.
Right. And we have not gotten the formal comments yet. We did not have the community meeting, but last time we were there and we were conversing, this anecdotal feedback from the community, they were telling me, yeah, we are aware, it's sulfuric acid not risk-free, but we rather take that risk compared to HF, simply because it doesn't volatilize as fast as the HF, or aerosolize as fast as the HF.
Well, I would encourage staff to look into the ionic liquid alkylation, our Honeywell technology, because if that seems promising, it probably is. And in all honesty, that sounds like something we would want all the refineries to be using eventually. So, and not only perhaps within our district, but nationwide, if it really just can do what they say it can do, right? And depending on, obviously there needs to be a cost factor consideration, but I would certainly want that to be considered.
Okay. Do we have any public comments?
Sounded like over there.
Any other board member comments before we take public comments? All right, we're going to take public comments. Anyone want to make public comment this time? No one wants to dip their toe in the acid? Good. Okay. All right, any other board member comments? If not, we'll move on. All right, going to our next item. We're going to do the update for facility prioritization procedures and supplemental guidelines for AB 2588. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Ian McMillan. I'm a planning and rules manager here at the district. In the interest of time, I'm going to go somewhat quickly through some of these slides. This is guidance that has gone through some public process already and has been generally well received. There's two guidance documents in particular that we're proposing to update. One is the facility prioritization procedures, and the second are the supplemental guidelines. The prioritization procedures, we're trying to add some streamlining into there to make sure that we're focusing district resources most effectively. And on the supplemental guidelines, it's not really proposing any new policy, it's just clarifying some language that was a little bit confusing in there and just updating some provisions to make sure it reflects current practice. Very briefly, the prioritization is used in AB 2588 to take a facility's emissions that are reported to us every 4 years and determine whether or not they need to do a health risk assessment. Facilities are prioritized low, medium, and high category using this methodology. The methodology is very conservative. It's kind of like a first level screening analysis, similar to what's done for our permitting program. Part of this change is being brought about, or there's a number of changes that have been brought about under AB 2588 because of the new risk guidance from WEHA that we've been talking about a lot, that went through last year. There's been some changes to rules because of this, and as well to some CAPCOA guidance documents. And again, the risk is going up about threefold using the new WEHA guidance. Very briefly, what we were looking at in AB 2588, we saw that for the health risk assessments that have been approved, more than 80% of them have risks that are below the public notification level. And this is through the history of the program. And almost a third of those actually have a cancer risk below 1. What we're realizing is that part of the reason for this is that the prioritization process is very conservative. And so we want to make sure that we're really focusing on the yellow and the red part of the pie chart as opposed to all the resources on the green parts. And so this is why we're trying to refine the methodology a little bit. I'm going to skip this next portion. It just shows that it's very conservative, the prioritization process. We use the top curve, not the bottom curve, and it yields very high concentrations. If you have questions, I can go into detail on that. Very briefly, what we're proposing to do is instead of using very conservative assumptions, we're going to be using, for example, some of the conservative assumptions have to do with meteorology. We use the worst meteorology in the basin. We assume that all receptors are downwind. Instead of doing that, what we're proposing to do is use local meteorology and assume the receptors are where they actually are located. Sometimes they're upwind, sometimes they're downwind. Those are the basic changes that we're proposing. I'm going to skip this next slide. Moving on to slide 8. What is the net effect of this? We looked at the last 2 quadrennial reporting years. It's about 225 facilities out of roughly 350 facilities in the core program. And with the current approach, that would yield about 92 facilities that have a priority score greater than 10. With the proposed approach, it drops it down to about 54. So we get about a 40% reduction in facilities with a priority score greater than 10. So thinking about that pie chart, we're not eliminating all of that green area, we're eliminating some of it. And I don't think the goal is to eliminate all of the green area. The idea is that this is a screening procedure. We don't want to lose anybody that we shouldn't be, we should be assessing, but we're trying to shape it down a little bit. Moving on to the next guidance document that we're proposing to update. This is the supplemental guidelines, and these guidelines are really used for what happens if a facility is moving past prioritization and into the health risk assessment realm of AB 2588. There's the main things that we're looking to do is, again, update some of the guidance document with regards to if there's been some emission changes that have occurred since a facility was asked to prepare an air toxics inventory report. We actually presented to this committee last summer, on this very topic of what to do in that situation. And so we are, at that time, we reported to the committee what our current practice is, and we just want to make sure the guidelines are reflecting actual current practice, and there's some confusing language in there right now on that. I'll get into that in a little bit. There's 3 more bullets here talking about risk reduction plans and progress reports, amendments to Rule 1402, and minor clarifications. This is really just reflecting what's currently in statute, ARB regulations, or in Rule 1402. We're just centralizing it all into a single guidance document itself. So there's not any significant changes there. I do want to touch very briefly on what we covered last summer and what we're putting into the guidance here. What do we do when there are emission changes that have occurred at a facility since what we will call their base year? And their base year, for example, might be, say, 2015 would be your base year for when you're conducting your health risk assessment, and the risks presented there are based on what happened during 2015. Well, because AB 2588 is often a multi-year long process of going through the toxic emission inventory, review, approval, health risk assessment, preparation, review, approval, that can be a long period of time. A facility might say, well, I've done a number of things that have reduced my emissions since we first started this process. I want to be able to take credit for that. What we have said is that because AB 2588 is in part a public right to know statute, that we will still use the base year for public notification. Because there are actual emissions that actually occurred and actual risks that actually occurred. So we'll still use that for public notification. But if risks have been reduced since that time, and especially if those are permanent, enforceable, and verifiable, we will use those changes in any risk reduction thresholds. And in addition, when we do public notification, this has actually happened many times recently, we present these reductions in public notification as well. We say, here's what the risks were. Since that time, the facility has also done X, Y, and Z, and the risks are now much lower. We present this all comprehensively, and we found this to be actually very successful when going out to the public and presenting a full comprehensive picture. And so we plan to continue this practice, and we're just putting this into the guidelines. For this last slide, we did hold a working group meeting for industry stakeholders. We had a public workshop yesterday. As I mentioned, this has been generally well received. The next steps will be briefing CAPCOA's Tarmac committee, who prepares the CAPCOA prioritization guidance, just to let them know what we're doing. And then we're also going to be bringing this to November board, both of these guidance documents. And I'm available for questions.
All right, any board member questions?
Just one, when we look at cancer risk, we look not only at the maximally exposed resident, individual or worker or resident, we also look at the cancer burden. Does this impact the cancer burden calculations in any way, or how we use that standard?
Sure, so the prioritization process has never actually used the cancer burden analysis. It's always looked at that.
Prioritization only in the health risk assessment.
Right, and that nothing will change on that.
Anyone else? Any public comment on this item? All right, thank you very much. Thank you. All right, we have 3 written reports attached. Any questions on any of those? If not, we'll move on to other business. Anyone have any other business?
Yeah, how does stationary source get through so quickly and mobile source take so long?
Well, I'm not on there anymore, so I can't tell you. But, I think I need to go back to move along. But anyhow. All right. Although maybe there's a report at stationary source we should be bringing here, like an AQMD report.
Just ask.
You guys want to hear it again? No,
No, thank you.
All right, I'll get that at another time. All right, any other public comments for items not on the agenda? All right, we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting then. See y'all next month. Thank you.
Length of the meetings are inversely proportional to the agenda.